So how do we reframe our negative thoughts? Find out in this episode of IncreMental Health Tips. Welcome to IncreMental Health Tips. My name is Jared, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host Liz. Today we're going to be talking about ways to reframe our negative thoughts to maybe give us a different perspective and a more positive outlook, perhaps, which can give us several benefits. So Liz, just starting off, what kinds of thoughts would we be looking to reframe? Does it work for all negative thoughts, or?
I think starting with developing an understanding of what your thinking patterns are and recognizing if you have some cognitive distortions, which are distorted thoughts, and we talked about that in one of our previous podcast episodes. But it can also be core beliefs. So it's things that can be really strong beliefs that someone has that have a negative impact on their life and aren't necessarily true.
So core belief, for example, I'm a failure because I didn't do something right. And so you might be super down on yourself and not realize that the ultimate core belief is that you are a complete failure and can't do anything right.
Well, usually the core belief would even go deeper than that. It might be something like, I'm unlovable because I'm a failure. So there are different layers to these, and that's one of the things that I help clients work through, is getting down to what those core beliefs are.
Okay, so just sticking with this same example as a practical application. So if somebody is experiencing situations where their expectations in life or their goals are not being met, and they're down on themselves because their core belief is this failure, how would they go about reframing this? Because I think to a lot of people the idea of reframing can sound sort of disingenuous or like you're just lying to yourself, and so it's not convincing yourself, really. So how does somebody get past those negative, the negative way one can look at reframing and actually begin to convincingly reframe their situation and their thoughts?
Well, the first part of it is that you have to become much more aware of what your thoughts are. A lot of times when I start asking people about what triggered their unwanted emotions, what thoughts were in your head at that time, a lot of times people struggled to even recognize what thoughts were going through their head at that time. And it doesn't mean that there wasn't a thought there. It just means that they didn't notice that thought. So a lot of times our thoughts come into our heads and go out of our heads without actually paying a lot of attention to what that thought is. Even if the person's focusing on the thought quite a lot when it's there, they might not remember it an hour later. And so learning to recognize those thoughts as those thoughts and emotions come up, writing it down, it allows you to take those next steps to be able to challenge those thoughts.
And so self-awareness is obviously something that is important to develop and can help you in a lot of ways. But a therapist really can help you sort of take this perspective and take steps to recognize your thoughts as you're having them. So what is the next step?
So once you recognize what thoughts you're having, you want to start to challenge those thoughts, asking, is this true? And looking at the evidence for it. And I find a lot of times clients find it helpful if they've got a list of cognitive distortions and the types of cognitive distortions, that it makes it easier for them to pick out the ways that those thoughts may not be true.
Well, and also making sure that you have on both points on both sides of the argument. Oftentimes reasoning, one thing that can really impact reasoning negatively is where somebody says, I believe this, and there's this piece of evidence for it, this piece of evidence for it, and then there's these other pieces of evidence against it, but they're weak. So it's really steel manning, or making a strong argument as you can for both positions, that's important. Because if you just only on the surface consider a couple of the bits of evidence that disagree with what your perspective is, then you're really not doing the exercise in a productive way.
Well, a lot of times the reasons that people can have unwanted emotions come up so often is that they've developed an attentional bias for the negative evidence. So they'll focus exclusively on the evidence for why they're not good enough, or why they couldn't do something, or why something's not worth doing. And they're focusing just on why this situation's not good, instead of taking time to look at, well, what was good about it, and just thinking through, are there positives in here that have been ignored? And one of the things that can help people with focusing on more positives is to start a thankfulness journal, and every day write down something positive. And maybe, your positive for that day is you had a cup of coffee in the morning, or something like that. It can be something quite ordinary. It doesn't have to be anything fantastic. You don't have to win the lottery to be thankful. But just having something simple that you can be thankful for, it can help shift your mind more towards the positive.
And so it sounds like this process is something that is more it's something that you do intentionally, actively, but it's something that over time becomes more passive.
Yeah, I do think it can be more passive as it becomes more of a habit, right? The negative thoughts that people have in their head, they often go through their mind passively, because people are just so used to having those thoughts that they don't challenge them anymore. And so when you start the process of challenging those thoughts, and just even making it slightly more positive, instead of, oh, if I fail this exam, I'm going to fail university and I'll never amount to anything. Just making it, well, if I fail this exam, maybe I'll fail the class and I might have to take it again.
Okay, so for our reframing, just to recap, we have understanding and recognizing what your thoughts are, and then finding ways to, once you have your thoughts nailed down, finding evidence to support your thought and evidence that challenges your thought, and from there you can mete out perhaps better perspective, or perhaps identify cognitive distortions that you may be falling into. Is there any last bit of advice or resources you would offer our listeners?
I think a lot of it depends on whatever situation someone's in. So if you have someone who, let's say their doctor just gave them, they said, you've got 6 months to live, you've got cancer, and, whatever treatment we've been trying hasn't been working. The way someone in that situation would go about this would be different than someone who has low self-esteem. So if you had someone who is in a terminal situation, the focus might be more short term. It might be more like, I'm going to make the best I have out of the time I have left, as opposed to, working through self-esteem issues or something like that, or, focusing on other goals.
Well, and also, finding a manageable goal. I mean, you don't have to solve all your problems, and you won't solve all your problems overnight, but maybe just working in a specific area can really help you nail down the process of reframing, and then you can work towards applying it to bigger areas. And for more on cognitive distortions, check out we've done a couple episodes and a couple shorts on cognitive distortions, and I believe we have a playlist on some more specific issues like managing stress and others. Any final recommendations before we sign off, Liz?
Oh, I think you covered it.
All right. Well, until next time, remember that small steps can lead to big changes. Please consider liking, sharing, commenting, and subscribing, and we'll see you next time.